Thanks for joining me again this week from the campus of Southwestern Seminary. Every year at the annual meeting, resolutions are a hot topic of discussion. Today, we talk about resolutions and how you can be part of the process on the Road to Dallas, presented by Southwestern Seminary. Joining me today on the Road to Dallas, presented by Southwestern Seminary, is Dr. Andrew Walker, chairman of this year's Committee on Resolutions. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Jonathan, thanks for the opportunity to be with you.
Now, Andrew, you're no stranger to Southern Baptist. You've been working at the ERLC before you went to Southern. Now you've been at Southern. How long have you been at Southern now? 3 or 4 years?
Actually, just turned 5 years recently.
Just turned 5 years.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, time goes by quickly, I guess. So you've been up at Southern
fast
for about 5 years now. And you're associate professor, is that right, up there?
Right. Yep.
Remind me. So basically, just give everybody an introduction to yourself and
sure.
What you teach up there at Southern.
My official title is associate professor of Christian ethics and public theology. Been here for 5 years. I'm a lifelong Southern Baptist. Grew up in Illinois, and so just really looking forward to the opportunity to lead a committee that I think is really important for the life of Southern Baptists.
Absolutely. And now you served with this committee before, so how will that experience help you lead the group this year?
Sure. So I served at the ERLC for about 6 years, and a part of my responsibilities there was to serve as an advisor to the committee. I wasn't a voting member of the committee. I was simply there to provide feedback occasionally when issues would arise. And so I think I have a lot of familiarity with the process of the committee. I've also written quite a few resolutions at both the state and national level. And so I have a good sense, I think, of what are the issues that would bring consensus to Southern Baptists on the issues of our day. And I think I can help us as a committee chairman kind of manage expectations about what we can reasonably hope to accomplish as a committee. And I think as someone who is a convictional, devotional Southern Baptist, I feel like I have a good sense of what we have stood for historically on these issues. And so I'm just really excited and thankful to President Clint Presley for the invitation to do this.
So speaking of managing expectations, that's probably the hardest part of being the Committee on Resolutions chairman, because people have expectations all over the map. So, you know, what's kind of your rubric, I guess you could say, for managing those expectations?
So, you know, as I said, I'm really interested in us as Southern Baptist speaking clearly and convictionally on our issues. I think for me, the reason that resolutions are so important is that they are a barometer for what we believe about any given issue in a cultural moment. They're statements of conviction. They're also teaching opportunities. We can't say everything we want to say in a given resolution, but these are opportunities for us to go on record talking about what we believe on important matters in the culture. And then they're markers of history. Future scholars and historians will look back on what this resolutions committee does, and in the same way that we look backwards to see what previous resolutions committees have done. But then they're also forward thinking as well. Because as a part of the resolutions process, we're not only trying to, reflect what Southern Baptists believe, we're also trying to bring awareness of issues that I think we need to be thinking proactively about. And I think one of the other big components that I think is a major source of responsibility for the resolutions committee is that Southern Baptists are treated as kind of an evangelical bellwether for kind of American Protestantism. And so we're often looked to for guidance as far as kind of where conservative evangelicals are going in this culture. And so this is just a tremendous opportunity, and really grateful for the chance to lead.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier that you've submitted a lot of resolutions. I know you had a hand in the submission last year of the resolution on IVF and the dignity of the human embryo. That was something that was kind of politicized in last year's political cycle, and actually we're seeing it right now with President Trump's recent exclamations about IVF and trying to make those
Yeah.
available for all. Like, why is it important that Southern Baptists speak to such? I don't want to call them controversial issues, but they sometimes become controversial because of how they get politicized and stuff like that. So why is it important for us to speak to those type of resolutions, or with those resolutions to those type of issues?
Sure. So, we find ourselves as a denomination in particular cultural contexts. And the cultural context is constantly kind of putting issues before us, whether or not we want those issues to be before us or not. And so we don't have the luxury to be indifferent. And so one of the reasons that Dr. Moeller and I helped kind of lead out on the resolutions last year on IVF was because there was a very significant court case in Alabama that led to a big national conversation. And there has been a lot of work done on kind of how evangelicals and Protestants think about IVF. And so it wasn't an altogether new issue. It was that it was kind of new on the national stage for the first time. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote that resolution, is because we wanted Southern Baptists to really just do one thing. And that was to kind of carry forward our pro-life ethic consistently across the board. And that's why the national media considered the IVF resolution pretty controversial. And I think I understand why it can be controversial, because it's not an issue that we all know everything about.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't controversial for Southern Baptists. I think it passed with over 90% approval, simply because it kind of springs from our underlying pro-life commitments.
Yeah, and it wasn't saying to not do IVF or that kind of thing. It was like, hey, we need to be responsible when we think through, when we're doing IVF and human embryo collection and obviously human embryo really waste, I guess you could say.
Well, that's exactly right. So, one of the things that resolutions are meant to do, they're meant to be teaching opportunities.
Yeah.
And so we can't say everything we want to say in that resolution that we did from last year. I, in many instances, wish it could have said more, but that's not the purpose of a resolution. It's merely to kind of bring ethical awareness to the issues and to get Southern Baptists aware of them.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for those wanting to submit resolutions this year?
I love that question. So in my classes, I'll often get asked, like, when do Christians weigh in on particular issues? And the three kind of broad categories that I think through are, do we have the competence? Meaning, do we have the ability to speak to this issue? Do we have the mandate to speak to this issue? Or do we have the command from Scripture to speak to this issue? And then do we have the jurisdiction to speak to this issue? Meaning, are we in the right lane when we speak to this issue? Because there are certain issues that we might care about that they're still not in our lane. So we don't care as Southern Baptists about speaking on issues like tax policies, agricultural subsidies, or fracking. We need to speak to the issues where we have kind of biblical precedent. But then if you kind of think downwardly from those three categories, I think there are other questions we need to ask ourselves as we're thinking about submitting resolutions. One would be the question of urgency. Does the issue that you're wanting to write a resolution on need to be addressed now, or could it be addressed at a later time?
Or has it just been addressed, really? I mean,
or has it just been
thing.
addressed?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. The issue versus thinking about complexity versus simplicity. Is the resolution that you're thinking about doing something that is more general in nature or more in the weeds? And the more in the weeds a resolution is going to get, the more difficult it's going to be for there to be complexity. Or for there to be consensus on the issue.
Yeah.
I think another thing is every resolution has to be compliant. It has to be compliant with the Baptist faith and message. Anything that deviates from those standards, we're not going to seriously consider.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Another big thing is to consider, is the resolution evangelistic? Meaning, is there actually good news that we can bring to bear on this issue? Because resolutions are not just statements of judgment, they're statements of hope. So we want to bring the good news of the gospel into these issues. And then I think we need to think through the categories of, is the issue you're wanting to do a resolution on, is it controversial? Now, not all controversy is bad, but we really need to ask whether we need to take a position on a given issue. So, for example, the IVF issue last year was kind of controversial, but it actually wasn't controversial for Southern Baptists. But we just need to have that kind of question in the back of our minds. We need to ask whether the issue at hand is relevant to the denomination that given year. we need to ask the big question: is the resolution that we're considering going to bring unity and consensus? We really don't want to do resolutions that are just someone's pet project. They need to be resolutions that can speak for the entire denomination. And then kind of what you just mentioned a second ago, the last category is redundancy. How recently have we spoken to this issue? And if you can kind of work through that rubric of things I talked about, and you can, come to a good, satisfactory answer, then submit your resolution. We want to give it a fair hearing.
Yeah, and that's just bad news for my resolution on fracking. I'm going to have to go back to the drawing.
That's right.
So, man, I had my hopes up, Andrew. So, speaking of that, though, like, what current topics do you anticipate maybe a need for Southern Baptists to speak to? Things that are going on in the culture that aren't redundant, that may be, and I'm not saying that we will this year or anything like that, but like, you're a very culturally aware, professor and writer. What are some of the things that you're seeing out there that Southern Baptists, may need to speak to?
Sure.
Even if we don't this year, even if we don't.
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing, Jonathan, that I'm really excited about, the 2025 convention is going to be the 100th anniversary of the Baptist Faith and Message. Mm-hmm. And so as you think about being Southern Baptist, the reason we are Southern Baptist and the reason we can speak at all is because we have a confessional statement that guides us. And so, I think that it's almost certainly very, 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 very likely we're going to have a resolution that is celebrating and honoring the very framework of our cooperation. So I think we'll see one on the Baptist Faith and Message. I think that there are a whole host of issues to think about in society today. One thing that I'm thinking about that we haven't had a previous resolution on is the issue of free speech. And we've seen a lot of conversations in the culture about threats to free speech. And I've been able to do some work in kind of my academic role and thinking about theological foundations for free speech. And so, I am one person of the committee. I can't speak for the committee. There may not be a resolution on free speech, but I can tell you this is something that I'm interested in, and I want to have a conversation with the committee about, but we'll see if they want to take this up themselves.
Yeah. So, we talk about submitting resolutions, a couple of the, kind of the logistical framework of that. So it opens April 1st. So submissions will open April 1st. There's two forms you need to fill out. Well, actually one form and then your resolution. So if you go to sbc.net/resolutions, you can go to the resolutions portal. There's a church form. To be able to submit a resolution, you have to be an eligible messenger or eligible to be a messenger. You don't have to be a messenger at the annual meeting, but you have to be from a church that can send a messenger. So you don't have to actually be there, but you need to be eligible to be a messenger. So you have to fill out something like that, get your pastor to sign it, or if you're the pastor, obviously you sign it, and then submit that along with your resolution for the committee to consider that. The committee's meeting at the end of May. We had a new resolutions process last year, Andrew, and a little different than I know whenever you've been with them in the past, where they meet beforehand. It comes out like 10 days before, and then there's like a 10-day, I wouldn't say review period, but a possibility, a period for people to kind of take a look and maybe think about, maybe amendments or things that may need to be tweaked here and there. And then there's the final report that comes out at the annual meeting in the not the book of reports, the bulletin on Tuesday. So, and that'll be kind of the final report from your committee. Everything's got to be in before, I think it's May the 23rd. So like you've got to get it in on May 22nd or before. So, because May the 23rd, that's whenever, the 20 days out, and you got to get them in, maybe May the 22nd. I got to check the dates on that. We'll put it on the screen. But you have to have them in right there by the end of May. So get them in early. Don't wait until the end, because the earlier you get them in, the more opportunity maybe they have to be seen by the committee and thought through. And so, I mean, anything you want to add on that? I mean, it's really, I would encourage people not to wait till the last minute. That's kind of one of the things that I think every year people are like, oh, I've waited too long or something like that. Just get them in early, right?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that's honestly the best advice I would give. The committee is going to be working, having several meetings even before we get to our meeting in May, where we'll work together as a group. So the sooner you can get your resolution in, the more time we're going to have as a committee to review that and pray through it and consider it. So please do get your resolutions in as soon as possible.
Yeah, and it is May the 23rd. You got to have them in before that. So the 22nd is the cutoff there. So got to get them in before then. And like you said, get them in early. Look through. I mean, go through that rubric one more time. It was something that Southern Baptists are competent to speak to.
Yeah. So do we have the competence, the mandate, the jurisdiction? Questions of is it urgent? Is it complex? Is it compliant? Is it evangelistic? Is it controversial? Is it relevant? And then does it bring unity and consensus to the convention?
Yeah. So if you were able to get a full slate of resolutions that bring unity and consensus, Andrew, I'll buy you dinner on Wednesday night of the convention. So that's my hope, at least, right?
Yeah, Jonathan, one of my goals, and it might be a lofty goal, is for this to be a peaceful and serene resolutions process. And so I will definitely let you or I'll let you definitely buy me that steak dinner for sure.
All right, Andrew, thanks for joining us again today. And thank you for watching this week's episode of The Road to Dallas. As always, this week's episode of The Road to Dallas is presented by Southwestern Seminary, whose core values are grace-filled and Christ-centered, scripturally grounded and confessionally guided, student-focused and globally engaged. Learn more at swbts.edu, and we will see you right here next time on The Road to Dallas, presented by Southwestern Seminary.